Ladies and gentlemen, hello. My name is Alexandra Gouta. I'm a journalist, and I welcome you all to this next session of the Delphi Economic Forum about the technology of the future. So can we actually govern tomorrow's tech, and what are the risks surrounding AI and beyond? Over the next 33 minutes, we will be discussing this issue with the four panelists, starting with Annette Aris. Annette, hello, welcome to Delphi. Annette is the Vice Chair of the Board of ASML, the world's leader in lithography systems for the production of semiconductors, and is also a Senior Affiliate Professor to INSEAD of Strategy, Professor of Strategy. So Annette, today there is a fight for the world's most critical technology, semiconductors. During the last few years, exports of high-end tech to China have been stopped, have been blocked, in order to prevent Beijing from acquiring tech sovereignty. So my question is, according to some, this could backfire and actually push China to develop its own technology much faster. What's your opinion about that? Could that happen? And how could we prevent this, maybe? I don't know.
So I think it will definitely happen. And at the same time, paradoxically, it will slow down the overall speed in the ecosystem of innovation. So why is this? Let's look at the example of the lithography systems with which you produce microchips. And we as Europe have a very, very strong position there. It's not only ASML, it's also companies like Carl Zeiss and Trumpf, who are the ones who are the only ones in the world who can make these unique products which produce the high-end chips. China can produce some of their own lithography systems, however, they are much lower speed, much lower quality. And if you talk to the Chinese foundries, they greatly prefer the European machines. And it is prohibited at the moment, the high-end machines, and also the layer below that is under increased scrutiny. So they are forced to go to the Chinese suppliers. And the result of that is that, of course, those Chinese suppliers go down the learning curve, and they increase the quality and the speed quite dramatically. And we think it's an increase of at least 5 years, which will happening. Does this mean that they will be able to also produce the high-end machines? I think that's going to be difficult. There are all kinds of issues of IP, but not only that, there are so many single suppliers of elements of these machines in the world that it will be extremely difficult to duplicate all these suppliers. And even if they would have a blueprint of these new machines, if they would have the cookbook, it would be so difficult to actually cook because it requires a lot of very specific activities to be able to build those machines. However, even if the high-end machines cannot be produced, there are a lot of workarounds. So instead of expose a chip just once, you can expose it multiple times and get the same effect. You can build 3-dimensional chips instead of 2-dimensional chips. So in the end, China will be able to produce chips which can do the same as the high-end chips we are currently producing, but maybe at a higher cost. So that effect is going to take place. But more importantly, there will be second-order effects. Why is the value chain of semiconductors such a thin chain? Why do you have in very many elements of the chain just 1 or 2 players? Why is there so little competition? Well, there's a reason for this. The reason is that you need to do a lot of upfront investments. And if you have a competitive end market and you can't earn it back, why would you invest so much in increasing the speed of innovation? And if you take away 1/3 to half of the world market of chips, then the return of the investment goes down. And so the incentive to keep the speed of Moore's law also go down. So there's a second-order effect we should also really think about. And last but not least, at the moment, we have a lot of these lithography machines in China. All these machines need to be maintained, they need to be upgraded. And different than oil and gas, there's a huge mutual dependency. So if you really want to build resilience, you might not just go for the simple way and trying to double everything, but you might also go for the other way and increase the mutual dependency. And by removing European machines from China, China doesn't need the maintenance, it doesn't need the support anymore, and you actually reach the opposite.
It sounds at least complicated, Annette. So thank you very much. So I would like to pass the floor to Ludo van der Heyden, Third Professor of Corporate Governance at INSEAD. Ludo, it's quite obvious to me that averting a tech-driven Armageddon is neither a pause in technological innovation nor regulation in isolation. So my question is, are you optimistic that all countries could and would agree in common goals and values about AI development and use, and why would they agree in a world of fierce competition? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alexandra. First, you answered the question very easily. I mean, could nations agree? The answer is yes, they could. So the real question is, will they? And I think, you know, this was always the joke about Obama. Yes, we can, you know, but what will you do? So the real question is in the action. I think this is the great advantage of Europe. I do not think there will be a global arrangement. But I think eventually there will be an arrangement within regions. So I think the arrangement will not come from nations to the global world, but I think it will come from regions, because regions have a collective interest. And in a certain way, in terms of regulating, you know, the internet and the AI, fortunately, you know, European Union is showing the way. And I think we're always very critical of the European Union, but we never applaud and celebrate. So I would say, you know, to go from nations to regions, and then you need to go from regions to the world. And a big problem, of course, is United Nations, which are not united, you know, that's very clear. So it should be disunited nations. But I think it is possible. I think what I would say as well is that you have three aspects, you know, to the technology, which is you have the hardware, you have the software, and you have the peopleware. And people talk too much about the hardware and the software, but I think you need to regulate the peopleware, you know, so that's really the issue. And this is where, you know, we're now into a big war in Ukraine and Russia, you know, and it is a people issue, you know. Fortunately, you know, hardware is on the good side. So I think my feeling is, in the final thing is, we need to govern the hardware, but we also need to govern the software, and we need to govern the peopleware. And I think that's so people think of it too much in a single way, and I think we should talk about it more systemically, the system. And the system has three components, and then you have the redundancy, which you could have. But I think one of the great advantages of tech is that we now are thinking of tech you know, like airplanes, which is self-regulating, where the tech makes sure that you don't crash. And I think that's in the direction, and the tech will help to remind people not to crash. So in that sense, that's another can. Technology will be an accelerator to make sure we don't hit the wall, you know, that we stop before we hit the wall, and the tech will actually help us. Can it help? Yes. Can it be destructive? Yes, because technology is neutral, has no morality, you know, and so you need to put in the human face to technology, and that is the good tech, as we talked in an article with Theos.
Thank you very much, Ludo. After all, so far, AI failings are human failings. So you're absolutely right that we have to focus on people. Thank you very much. And now I would like to pass the floor to Theodoros Evgeniou, Professor of INSEAD and also co-founder of Tremau, a company that provides solutions to manage technology risks and comply with digital regulations. Theodoros, a question that often arises to my mind is the following. How can we actually govern something that will become much more smarter than us very soon. Will probably become much more smarter than us very soon. And furthermore, are we proactive enough to identify in time the real challenges and risks arising from AI use and development? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. First of all, let me start by thanking my colleague Ludo and Annette for being here. I'm now further in debt to them for coming all the way from France.
Good, we'll exploit that.
Yes, I know, I'm aware of that. To your question, also a little bit echoing and or building on what Ludo said, I think it's important to be optimistic but cautiously optimistic, first of all. And of course, we have to continue the innovation, because that's the one force, technological innovation, that continuously will kind of move the needle of whatever we can do for all applications. So we have to be very careful not to stop that, but at the same time manage the downside. And of course, that's what governance is about. And we have here the world experts of governance and the director of the INSEAD Corporate Governance Center now, Annette, and founder, Ludo. And we always talk with Ludo about this. Governance being basically a way to manage, it's an insurance on the downside, but also a support for the upside. So it's important to understand it this way, which is, again, lessons from the master here. Now to your question, first of all, can we understand the risks of this technology? It's a learning process. We understand some risks and are continuously work on doing so. For example, the US National Security Commission on AI a couple of years ago published a report on what are some of the basic risks of AI. And there are identified things that range from, let's say, new technology risks, for example, variations of cybersecurity, like what they call data or model poisoning, where somebody can attack, a bad actor can attack the models we have or the data we have and change the AI's behavior to be misbehaving, right? And by the way, a big issue here is that we don't understand how to control the behavior of this technology. And this technology, unlike any other technology, has behaviors. It has personalities. When AI, even the older AI, recommends to us whom to connect with or what to read, it has a taste. It's very important to understand this. So controlling the behavior of this or having attacks for the behavior of this is an important risk. Another kind of risk is, of course, risks around applications, for example, in healthcare. The democratization of AI and big foundation models who are very powerful can create potential risks of anybody anywhere coming up with innovations of from health to bioviruses to whatever, which can be dangerous, obviously. And of course, the big question mark that we all are trying to understand is the control of AI, and I use the word control intentionally, on how we perceive the world. The information we see, the information we get, how we believe who said what, that affects our decisions, from simple decisions to voting decisions. I'll just quote here a final line of a wonderful book by Eric Schmidt, Henry Kissinger, and Dan Huttelnocher, In the Age of AI. They wrote a couple of years ago, before obviously Henry Kissinger died. Which at the end they have all these examples about, you have a case where AI recommends friends to children, recommends things for us to read, or helps people with education, the elderly with support, and they close with a question. If all these things that determine who we are decided by technology, what then does it mean to be a human in the age of AI? That's a final question, which I think is very important. Now, going to your question about governance, obviously there are different levels, very complex, and one would think about this is, of course, there are different layers, for example, regulatory layers, and that goes back to the question that Ludo mentioned before about will we have alignment or not. Difficult, in many ways. So we have the EU AI Act, of course, we will follow, so that's one dimension of it. Then obviously we have a corporate governance in general, but I'll go directly to what's emerging as a key practice or a key driver, if you like, the so-called AI governance. The AI governance is something that companies, as we speak, are setting up. That's where they are today, setting up their AI governance playbook, call it whatever you like. That has, of course, much like any governance, a set of principles, right? Privacy or whatever, security and the likes. There is a set of roles, who is doing what where and who is responsible for what. A set of processes, how do we make sure that potential incidents by AI are communicated from the bottom to the top and policies managed from top to the bottom and executed. And of course, tools to manage all those things, including using AI to govern AI. For example, using AI to monitor and detect deepfakes. right? A big issue, or so-called AI incidents. So in that sense, just to close there, yes, there are risks, of course, a lot of opportunities, but we can also use technology to make the world safer. And it's important to realize that the risks of AI can be also managed with some of the technologies.
So there is, as long as the AI who will control AI will be trained based on the right principles. This is another question, of course. Thank you very much. I would like to pass to you now, Chris. Chris Anagnostopoulos is a partner of QuantumBlack, and you're also with McKinsey Greece. So, Chris, my question is, when discussing AI these days, the risks and challenges about biases, inequalities, cybersecurity are already apparent. So my question is there practically a way to tackle all these risks and challenges in a world where everyone wants to be first in achieving an even stronger AI?
Thank you for the question. Thank you to all the other distinguished speakers for setting the ground so nicely for what I will try to answer here. I think I'll maybe give the view of the CEOs and the technical leaders in the corporate world and industry that are actually building systems, and from our vantage point, advising them and helping them build systems worldwide. Especially in the last year, we've been exposed to thousands of these situations. So maybe a few learnings from that is what I'll start with. First, to comment on corporate governance and responsible AI governance. This is definitely the next step. It is sometimes the first step, even in geographies where there isn't yet as strong a regulatory framework as in Europe. CEOs feel the need to introduce corporate governance to protect and ensure against downsides. But let me give you some numbers. So we run a recent survey. 57% of CXOs right now across industries feel that it is a key priority to implement AI and Gen AI systems. That said, only 9% of them feel very prepared to handle the risks that come with this. And 86% of them either have no or limited responsible AI governance in place. So the speed at which things are moving is outpacing the ability not just of countries, but even corporates to self-govern. Now that said, corporates can move faster than countries, hopefully, in setting up internal governance structures, and that's ongoing right now. But there is a nervousness gap, right? There's that gap of CEOs feeling ready to experiment and recognizing the opportunity, recognizing that speed is a strategy, as we've noted before. In this particular space, you don't want to get left behind, but at the same time, being self-conscious enough about their own corporate structures to recognize that they're not prepared to handle the responsibility, and they're working towards that. That nervousness, though, translates in what we observe in terms of scaling and adoption of these technologies. Whereas everybody's experimenting, everybody's piloting, very few companies are actually managing to bring these systems to production and actually have impact both downstream to their consumers, their users, or to the organizations themselves internally. And indeed, internal pilots are often what's tried first. So that gap is precisely because of the lack of a risk and governance process that's been battle-tested. So you have these situations where everybody in an organization is piloting Gen AI. Some of these kind of take the next step to being actually used in a production environment. But when the time comes to scale and really reach your end consumer, the CEOs or the security, the people responsible for IT risk, cybersecurity, they will press pause because they're not ready. So what we observe very clearly is that, in fact, whereas governance is often thought as something that delays innovation, in this situation, it's quite the opposite. Those organizations that have a governance structure are actually moving faster to adoption. They may have fewer pilots because there's a little bit of an overhead to get started, but those pilots that are designed with a risk mindset from the beginning have a greater chance to eventually scale and be adopted, and that's what really matters in the end. So we see governance and a risk mindset as an accelerator rather than something that delays innovation. I'll close with one more thought that there's a problem right now in terms of the new wave of AI, the generative AI, because it's so easy to get started with, at least it appears to be easy to get started with. It's something that in principle you could try out across almost every business function in a large corporate. And that can create a lot of noise in an organization. Everybody wants to try it, and as somebody responsible for the risk, you need to ask yourself, how tightly do I manage that process? Do I let 1,000 flowers bloom and see what happens, or do I more kind of in a more centralized manner dictate where do we focus, where do we invest? And what we see is that in fact there's a middle ground evolving, which is that third-party companies, software vendors, are building Gen AI into their tools for kind of low-hanging fruit use cases, so that this will become part of the normal software procurement process, normal risk processes almost, where you validate that your, coding suite and your Microsoft Office suite, they have Gen AI tools now embedded in them. So that's kind of becoming commoditized by the existing software vendors or newcomers that are following best practices. And then what we find is more effective is for CXOs to focus on a single business domain and say, we're going to invest fully into this business domain and transform it using AI and Gen AI. And that gives them a more holistic view of the risks, because what we observe is that it's no longer as easy to manage risks completely functionally in isolation. To your point, cybersecurity is no longer just about a firewall, because you have these data poisoning techniques, model poisoning techniques. So it becomes a more holistic AI risk that you need to manage, and that can be best done at a business vertical fashion rather than horizontally across the organization, at least for now.
Mm-hmm. And then thank you very much, Chris. We only got 12 minutes, so I got to keep this even smarter and more comprehensive. Annette, back to you now. One of the fears is that future AI could be trained on the principles of authoritarian regimes. This especially goes for artificial general intelligence, if it ever exists. So my question is, what could you do to prevent such a risk, and do you believe that the future of artificial intelligence could indeed favor authoritarianism? Thank you.
Let me start by saying that I think AI, and especially generative AI, favors centralization. If we think back, some of us remember the early days of the internet, and we all thought the internet would be great for lots of startups and entrepreneurs, and finally we get rid of the oligopolies, and then we ended up with big tech. You see that in Gen AI, the push towards centralization is even bigger. You need a lot of cloud capacity to do it. You need a lot of data, very expensive training. Gemini from Google was 400 million investments in training. So to do the basic large models in Gen AI, it's you need size, you need and you need a lot of power and money. What does that mean for regimes? The fundamental thing, I think, is that basically what Gen AI and AI itself already does a bit, it solves the dilemma between top-down and bottom-up. If you do top-down, you can decide very quickly, you can move fast. If you are bottom-up, you have a lot of people with local knowledge, local insights, can be much more tailored. And so if you stick to top-down too long, in the old days you would run against the wall, because things would become too complex, you would miss too much information, and you would start taking very, very wrong top-down decisions. Now, with AI and Gen AI, you can actually combine both of them. You can tailor, you get so much detailed data, you can actually analyze it, and you can really tailor very much to specific circumstances. And of course, if you are a top-down regime, that's great. It will be very attractive for top-down regimes to start using AI for that. If you look at the EU, it's trying to do exactly the opposite. We talk a lot about the AI Act, and there's great stuff in it, like it prohibits social scoring, it prohibits biometric categorization, it prohibits individual predictive policing, it prohibits emotional recognition, and all those kind of things we don't want regimes to use. And so the big question, coming back to what Ludo said, is how do we get other regimes, other regions to take over these kind of principles? It will be really, really difficult. It might be pressure, or it might be conviction. The United Nations is not functioning. So it will be an uphill battle, and my feel is that it will be difficult to arrange this on a global scale. But in the end, there will be effects, indirect effects. If you start using this Gen AI too much to police your people, it will have effects in the end on your economy, it will have effects on your growth, and therefore, hopefully, in due time, it will show people that this is not the way to go. But we still have to go through the valley first.
Very much, Annette. Agreeing on principles is, of course, very, very important. So I would like to get back to you, Ludo. You're also a member of the board of Naftogaz, a Ukrainian company. AI was used extensively in the war in Ukraine, and as far as I know, there are no international agreements or laws or regulations for the use of AI as a weapon. So my question is, what have we learned so far from the use of AI in the Ukraine war, and what can we do here and now to make sure that things don't get out of control one day? Thank you.
Yes, well, thank God in Ukraine for technology, and thank God for AI, because otherwise the Russians would already be in Kiev, you know, and Ukrainians would not have resisted. So I think this was, I think, very, very important. I would say technology is fundamental, and I think what I want to debunk, and that's fake news, which is AI is a new technology. I now realize I did a PhD in the 70s. I was doing an AI PhD, you know, or COVID. COVID is a new disease. No, there were already respiratory. So there is this view that everything has to be new. No, AI is not new. So there are new features, but there are many things that are standard, and indeed, we need to regulate technology. We know this about nuclear, and the most dangerous thing now is the unbundling, this was said yesterday, the unbundling of the arms agreement, of the nuclear arms agreement, I think is very, very negative. But I would say that is focused on hardware and software, but it's driven by people. So it's the peopleware issue that actually we need to address. So I would say in terms of what I think is the positive side is we should go more into human governed AI, as opposed to, you know, there is a subform of AI which is lower key, which is human-assisted AI, which is, you know, human-assisted AI is a lower form of AI because the machine doesn't do it by themselves. No, we should focus on human-governed AI, and I think as we do more AI, we get back to the people question, which is, you know, is technology serving people, or are people being, you know, serving technology? And I think this is where the obsession of the US is that, you know, we're all there for the shareholder, we're all there for technology. No, it's the other way around. The shareholder is there for the corporation, because without money you don't have a corporation, but the corporation is there for people. And I think this is where I think AI will actually push for governance practice, which is desperately needed, because we all know that the governance practice in the world is poor. You know, whether it's global governance, climate change, UN, whether it's industry governance, the financial crisis, whether it's corporate governance. I mean, look at Theranos, you know, Silicon Valley Bank. So the practice of governance is in its infancy, is emergence, and we need to focus much more on humans and governance, and I think this is, I think, one of the things which I think should have always been there, but I think we've taken our eye off the ball, that we should not in AI focus on the hardware and the software. We should have a priority, and in the end it's the peopleware issue which is the key dimension, and that actually makes us, you know, allows us to focus actually on people, and the end will be that, you know, if AI and technology get to the end, then everything will be automated. Then all we will have to do is talk, which is all that's left is governance, and then we will go back to the agora, you know, which is all of our life will be talking to each other, and the machines will do the rest. So I think that's basically, I'm actually quite optimistic. Is it a given? No, because I think there is a risk that we'll be late, and that there will be tipping points, and that we might actually go to the Armageddon, you know, that the Earth will self-destruct. But the Earth will self-destruct because humans were not wise, you know, because the sophist or the idiots won, or the crooks won, and I think we have to use the technology for the good people and for humanity.
Ludo, unfortunately, you got very little time left. Theodoros, one question. Of course, no one can predict the future, but do you believe that we have at least a decade to adapt to all these changes? If you could answer in very few words.
Yes, I'm very fast because he always takes my time, which is fine, I'm used to it. So, first of all, yeah, I don't know if it's a decade, it's a journey, it's a continuous journey, and the question is how will the journey look like? We don't know, but I would suggest that we at least look at two things. A, some fundamental principles. For example, AI as an idea may be old, but what we keep seeing is an increasing performance of how accurate and how good it is, which as it crosses thresholds, it enables new solutions. For example, 4 years ago, there were no AI medical devices making diagnosis. Now there are about 500 plus approved by the US FDA because the performance increased. The same for cars, the same for lots of other applications. So we will see an increased performance threshold, which create new markets and new solutions. That's the first. Second, the key word is socio-technical. Technology shapes society, society shapes technology, especially AI that is learning and adapts to us, to our behaviors. So we will co-adapt both individually from the education system up to the organizational change, up to the social change and the systems change. And that will be happening there. Third, and I'll stop there because there is not much time. Second thing is beyond foundations, there is also weak signals. So my favorite weak signal is what's called an emerging science of intelligence. Some people call it artificial neuroscience, and the whole idea is, going back to what I mentioned before, we do not understand what the human brain does, which has a few trillion neurons, the same way as we don't understand what this trillion parameters OpenAI or whatever it is model does. What we do in both cases, it's a study of it's an object of study in a scientific methodology, and the new science of intelligence will help us understand what's happening in this artificial, if you may like, brain, and improve it. So we'll see improvements.
Wish we had more time to discuss this last one, but
exciting.
Unfortunately we don't have more time. So, Chris, very, very shortly, Generation A. Members of this generation are born in a world, an AI-driven world of deep fakes and fake news. How can we protect them? How can we make them remain critical thinkers, smart and intelligent?
Sure. So I'll be very brief. I mean, generally, parents always worry about the kids these days. You know, I think we have to be optimistic there. A Gen A consumer is more likely to be exposed to a deep fake. They're also more likely to ask the question whether something is a deep fake. So I think we'll see a generation of informed consumers. Hopefully, that's the objective, right? And we've been there before. I agree with you. Not everything is new here. We've been there before with tobacco, with sugar, right? So there are precedents where consumer products kind of rushed ahead of an informed decision, and there was more harm than benefit. But then it self-corrected, with help, of course, from regulation. The last thing I would say is that a very important problem in AI research is value alignment. How do you align the AI with objectives that are conducive to societal welfare? And I think what we're seeing is a recognition that the business models that are creating investment in AI tools are often what are driving unintended, sometimes, consequences. Like, for example, our first contact with social media didn't go as planned. It created an outrage economy because what we're optimizing for was actually time spent on the screen, and lo and behold, like, outrage is a good way to keep stuck looking at your screen. Now, this was not necessarily intended, but what we're observing now is a bigger appetite to measure all of these unintended, say, consequences, side effects, externalities of the process, and then be brave about raising these trade-offs in the executive boardroom all the way up to the top and saying, look, we're optimizing for X, but we're also, unfortunately, maximizing Y, which is a side effect. So we need to be responsible responsible. We need to make sure that companies don't completely transfer all of the responsibility to the consumer. At the same time, the consumer needs to be informed and make informed decisions. I'm hoping that soon we'll have data nutrition and model nutrition labels on all of our products, and that will be a good start.
Thank you for answering so quickly. I would like to thank you all for being with us today, for making the time to be with us today, and all of you in the audience for attending. They say that when a new technology rolls over you, if you're not part of the steamroller, then you're part of the road. So we sure have a lot to do over the next few years. Thank you very much.